I am Ayla Frost, 35 years old, and tonight should have been one of the most radiant, unforgettable evenings of my daughter's young life. Hours before the spotlight was set to burn down upon her, illuminating months of aching rehearsals and whispered encouragements in our dimly lit living room, I found myself staring at the shredded lace of her costume lying limp across the wooden floor. The silence was so heavy it seemed to pull me under, the threads unraveling like veins across a broken heart. My sister-in-law, Helena, stood at the doorway, her lips curving upward in that half-smirk I had come to know so well, her eyes gleaming with malice masquerading as victory. The words slipped from her like venom, soft but sharp enough to pierce bone. Now my girls are guaranteed to win. In that instant, rage flared in me, but it was quickly strangled by despair. This wasn't just fabric. This was my daughter's dream, her confidence, her fragile faith in me as her protector. I wanted to scream, to tear Helena's satisfaction apart the way she had torn this garment, but my throat locked tight. Then, like a candle flame igniting in darkness, my 15-year-old, Luna, placed her hand on mine. Her voice was low, steady, oddly soothing, and she whispered words that froze me mid-breath. "Mom, don't worry." She lifted the garment's hem, revealing something only she knew existed, a secret she had kept hidden not out of mistrust, but out of quiet resolve. And in that revelation, as my laughter cracked open the silence and echoed against the walls like thunder after lightning, I realized the night was far from lost. The dress she had ruined was actually only the decoy, a carefully stitched rehearsal copy that Luna had deliberately left out in plain sight, anticipating the venom that dripped so predictably from Helena's envy. The real dress, her masterpiece, her rebellion, her shield, was tucked away inside the cedar chest in her room, glowing with sequins she had sewn herself beneath the secretive cover of sleepless nights. As she revealed it to me, I felt a tremor run down my spine, not from the beauty of the fabric, but from the dawning realization that my daughter was already learning the cruel language of betrayal, already anticipating how jealousy could carve scars across family bonds. The air seemed to throb with cinematic weight, shadows flickering across the walls as though our house itself was holding its breath. My heart tightened, both in pride and in pain, because in her small defiance she had become older than her years, a strategist in a war she should never have been forced to fight. I watched her unfurl the garment, the threads catching the dim light, refracting like shattered glass transformed into something divine. And in that instant I understood she had inherited more than my resilience, she had inherited my fury too. Every fold, every stitch was a declaration that she would not be erased, not by her aunt's cruelty, not by the whispers of favoritism that had long poisoned our family gatherings, not by anyone who dared try to eclipse her. My pulse hammered with a rhythm that felt cinematic, each beat sinking to an invisible score swelling in the background of my mind, and I knew this wasn't just about a dance competition anymore. This was about the generational wound that Helena's smirk had torn wide open, a wound stitched together with years of silence, manipulation, and the quiet erosion of trust. Luna's calmness, her foresight, was both a balm and a dagger, reminding me that innocence had been stolen from her far too soon, yet also that she was prepared to fight a battle I had once believed was mine alone. And as I clutched her creation to my chest, laughter still trembling in my throat, but now burning with vengeance rather than hysteria, I promised myself that Helena would taste the bitter edge of defeat not through confrontation but through the brilliance of the very child she had tried to sabotage. The hours that followed unfolded like a storm pressing against fragile glass, every second dripping with tension, so palpable it left the air thick, unbreathable. I moved through the house like a specter, the polished wood creaking beneath my steps as I carried the true dress in my arms, its weight heavier than silk should ever be, because it wasn't fabric I held, it was defiance stitched into form. Luna followed behind me, her face composed but her eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen since she was a little girl defending herself on the playground against children who mocked her for being different. The memory clawed at me, her standing tall with fists clenched, refusing to bend, and I realized this night was merely an extension of that moment, her spirit unchanged yet sharpened, sculpted by betrayal. Down the hall, Helena's laughter lingered, faint but sharp as shards of glass ground beneath boots, and though I did not look at her, I felt her presence like poison seeping into the air, confident, assured of her triumph. I let her linger in her illusion, because revenge is never sweetest when it's loud. It's sweetest when silence curls around it, when the enemy believes they have already won. Luna whispered again, barely audible, asking if she should say something, if she should confront her aunt, and I shook my head, pressing a finger gently to her lips. The war we were waging was not fought with words but with spectacle, with the eruption of brilliance that would unravel every smug glance and whispered cruelty. Outside, the night had begun to swell, clouds shifting across the moon as if nature itself prepared for a performance, and I stood at the window for a long moment, staring into the darkness, feeling its weight press against my chest. My mind flooded with images of every gathering where Helena had cut me down with casual cruelty, every smirk she had wielded like a weapon, every time she had sown discord in whispers too soft to challenge, yet sharp enough to bleed. And now, finally, I saw the threads tying all of it together, the deliberate sabotage, the years of subtle dominance, the way she had orchestrated my silence. My daughter's hands touched my shoulder, grounding me, her presence a reminder that this wasn't just about vengeance, but about ensuring she would never inherit the chains I had worn for too long. The clock ticked closer to the moment of truth, the stage waiting, the audience hungry, and beneath that suffocating anticipation, I felt my heart shift. This wasn't merely my fight anymore. It was Luna's stage, her battlefield, and I was no longer just a mother but her silent general, orchestrating justice not with swords but with sequins, not with anger but with poise sharpened into a blade. The theater lights loomed like distant stars as we arrived, the grand building rising from the earth like a monument carved out of ambition and shattered dreams. Families buzzed in the marble lobby, faces painted with nervous smiles and hushed prayers, each parent clutching the fragile hopes of their child as though holding glass ornaments that might shatter with the wrong breath. I clutched Luna's hand, feeling the pulse beneath her skin, a rhythm steady, resolute, stronger than mine had ever been on nights when I faced Helena's venom alone. The scent of polished floors mingled with stage dust that clung to the air like ghostly perfume, and every step toward the dressing rooms echoed like a drumbeat in my skull. Helena's daughters stood nearby, shimmering in gowns too pristine, their faces glowing with the arrogance of girls who had never known failure because their mother carved away any possibility of it. Helena herself lingered in the shadows behind them, her lips curving once more into that poisonous smile, her eyes flicking toward the garment bag I carried, as if she believed it still held the ruined dress. The satisfaction in her gaze was a dagger pressed against my ribs, but I refused to let her see me bleed. Instead, I moved past her with deliberate calm, the whisper of fabric brushing my legs, sounding louder than her gloating laughter. Luna disappeared into the dressing room, and I leaned against the cool wall outside, listening to the muffled rustle of costumes, the frantic clatter of makeup brushes, the nervous hum of girls preparing to step into the blinding glare of the stage. The air trembled with anticipation, and in my chest, a storm of memories roared. How Helena had once been my confidant, how we had laughed together when I first joined this family, how her envy had grown roots the moment I had given birth to Luna, a daughter who seemed to steal the affection Helena craved for herself and her children. Every cruel remark, every subtle sabotage, every attempt to make me question my worth, tonight, it would all collapse beneath the brilliance of a child she had underestimated. I closed my eyes, envisioning the stage lights igniting, envisioning the moment Helena's smirk would finally falter, and for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of triumph stir within me, not as a fantasy, but as an inevitability. The stage was no longer just a place for performance. It had become an altar where betrayal would meet its reckoning, and Luna would rise from the ashes of ruin Helena had tried to bury her in. The moment the velvet curtain trembled, preparing to ascend, the theater seemed to hold its breath, and I with it, my heart pounding in sync with the low murmur of the audience. The spotlight cast a halo of anticipation across the polished floor, waiting for Luna to emerge, and I pressed my palms together so tightly they ached, as if sheer force could keep her safe from every malicious shadow that threatened her tonight. The music swelled, the opening notes trembling like glass about to shatter, and then she stepped forward, her dress exploding beneath the lights in a storm of sequins and silk that caught the air as though the universe itself had poured stars into her fabric. Gasps rippled through the room. The same people who had whispered of Helena's daughters being untouchable now watched in stunned silence, their expectations collapsing in a single instant. Luna moved with grace that was not just learned but born, every step a defiance, every spin a declaration that she would not be broken, her face calm yet blazing with fire that ignited the crowd. From the corner of my eye, I caught Helena's posture falter, her confidence trembling like a candle too close to the wind, and my chest surged with a vindication, so sharp it almost cut. Yet, beyond revenge, beyond victory, I felt something deeper, an ache, bittersweet and heavy, as I realized that my daughter's brilliance tonight had been forged in pain, sharpened by betrayal, polished through sleepless nights of secrecy. My throat tightened, pride tangling with sorrow, because while I wanted her triumph to be pure joy, it was also scar tissue made visible, an art born from wounds Helena had inflicted. The music rose higher, Luna leapt, and the audience erupted into applause before her feet even touched the ground again. In that storm of clapping hands and dazzled eyes, she wasn't just my child. She was a force, a story unfolding, a storm sweeping across the stage. And in that storm, Helena's daughters looked small, dim, forgotten, their practiced smiles flickering into nervous shadows, while their mother's eyes turned sharp, cold, realizing that her cruelty had not destroyed us but transformed us into something far greater than she could ever wield. When the final note crashed into silence and the curtains cascaded shut, the theater erupted into thunderous applause, the kind that shook the air like a tempest breaking against cliffs. I stood frozen, hands trembling against my chest, watching my daughter bow with a composure that belonged not to a 15-year-old girl, but to a queen who had conquered her battlefield. The audience rose to their feet, a tidal wave of admiration, and Luna's name floated in whispers across the rows like sacred hymns carried on the wind. My eyes stung, not from sorrow now, but from the searing realization that I was witnessing the birth of something unstoppable, something Helena could never corrupt. Yet even in that moment of glory, my gaze found hers across the room, her lips pressed into a bloodless line, her hands tightening into fists at her sides, the mask of superiority she wore for years fracturing beneath the weight of her own failure. She tried to smile, but her daughter's tear-glossed eyes betrayed the truth. The crown had slipped, and there was no clawing it back. I wanted to savor her unraveling, to let vengeance flood my veins and scorch the memories of every humiliation she had branded into me, but a strange stillness overtook me instead. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was liberation, the slow, quiet release of chains I hadn't realized I was still carrying. For years, Helena's shadow had hovered over me, shaping my silence, sculpting my fear, but tonight, in the glow of my daughter's brilliance, that shadow disintegrated. My laughter threatened to rise again, not cruel, not mocking, but free, like the breaking of a storm into sunlight. As Luna stepped off the stage, her eyes met mine, and in their shimmer I saw both victory and a plea, an unspoken request to let this night be about her, not about the decades of venom Helena had spilled into our lives. And I understood then, with painful clarity, that revenge had already been written not in words, not in confrontations, but in sequins and sweat, in the light that clung to my daughter like a crown carved from fire. Helena had destroyed nothing. She had only revealed the indestructible.